Welcome to episode 2 of intx, where we'll explore the stories of both ordinary and extraordinary people in tech, with the goal of helping you better understand how to get in and navigate the sector. The format of these podcasts is as follows. We'll walk through the career of the guests from as early as is relevant, exploring the who, what, when and whys of each person to see who they've become today. So today's guest is a data science expert and published author, Zacharias Voulgaris PhD. After gaining his PhD in computer science from the University of London in 2009, he quickly moved into data science and has grown with the field, watching it become the mainstream sector it is today. He's held various roles from data scientist to project manager at Microsoft through to C-level positions such as CTO and now Chief Data Science Officer for Sphere XR. So I'm interested to hear of how you've seen this sector grow and how you've managed your career through to the C-level. Would be an interesting discussion. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Just one clarification. I think the bio you have read is a bit out of date. I'm no longer with Sphere XR because it has closed down. But I'm still in the startup sphere, and I'm looking into starting a new project actually, or joining an existing one. So I'm not an active CDO, but I have been CDO recently, and I'm very happy to talk about all that and the whole journey.
Yeah, no, good. So it's just for you to start from kind of as far back as you think is relevant. So even just briefly cover your degree and then how you got into your PhD.
Sure. So I started in engineering and management from the Technical University of Crete, which was a 5-year course. And this was the equivalent of a bachelor's and a master's put together with an emphasis in technical education. So I was very hands-on from the very beginning. The engineering course included lots of labs, lots of hands-on sessions, and some programming as well. So afterwards, I figured, okay, let's continue with the hands-on, but more on the information systems level. And I did a master's there at the City University of London, where I learned about the information systems theory and the technology, because it was also very hands-on, lots of programming courses. It was a full 13-month course, not the typical academic year, but an extended one. And there was a thesis at the end, which was also very hands-on, lots of programming. And afterwards, because I really enjoyed this kind of stuff and it wasn't that challenging as I thought originally, I decided to do a PhD straight away. Instead of waiting, because the longer you stay in the industry, the less likely you are to do a PhD afterwards, unless you're really motivated. So I wasn't sure if I was going to be that motivated later on. So I said, let's do it now. I'm already in a capital of education in Europe. So might as well continue. So I did a PhD. After a lot of research on different areas and different universities around the country, I decided to go to the University of London because, well, it was the best. And also I found a really good professor there who was into AI and machine learning and all that stuff. So even before data science was a thing, we were doing data science stuff there.
Yeah, and what kind of years was that, your PhD then?
I finished in 2009. I think I started in 2004. It was 4 years, but I did it a year more because I did a lot of publications, conferences and stuff. And I also was not in a rush to finish because, I'd rather do something well rather than do it quickly. Yeah. And University of London has really high standards, so I didn't want to go to the Viva and fail. So I said, okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm ready when I go there and present and defend my thesis. And it wasn't a walk in the park by any means, even though my professor made it feel easy, the whole process. And also there was another professor, another supervisor involved. So it was a joint supervision program. It wasn't just one. So both of them did a really good job at making everything look very easy and very interesting. Even the stuff I didn't really care that much about. But at the same time, there were standards that had to be met. So I had to really prepare myself. I had to really know how to present myself in front of an audience of peers, and also, try new ideas, but also make sure that they are good, because many people can come up with good ideas, but how many people can deliver something worthwhile? So the PhD was also very hands-on, trying new metrics, new methods, new algorithms, often built from scratch. And afterwards, it wasn't that difficult to find something. Like, I actually was recruited before I had even presented the PhD. And the first place where I worked was Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, where I had a small chat over the phone with a man who ran the lab there, and we didn't have to say much. He didn't even need to go into these lengthy technical interviews you often see in the industry. So I got into this postgraduate kind of research fellowship program, which was a paid fellowship, of course, because researchers at this level get paid, and they do research work among other things. Lots of admin work as well, lots of brainstorming, coming up with publications as well. Although this particular lab was not that big on publications when I was there, because it was more working like a subcontractor of sorts, which is amazing if you think about it, because you get industry experience all while being in an academic environment, so you don't feel this pressure of performing. It was a pressure of performing, of course, because it wasn't a walk in the park either, but it wasn't the same as in the industry where you can get fired at any moment. So you get usually a kind of contract for 1 year, which can be extended for another half a year or a full year, or however long the funding can take you. So it's not a permanent position by any means, but it was steady enough to help you think more openly. Of course, after working there for 1.5 years, I figured that it was not really the thing for me, because it was too academic, and also we were at the mercy of the grants, because if you don't have enough grants for a lab, you don't really get to do much research, and often the research is limited by what the grants really ask you to do, and sometimes we can't even showcase our work outside the university or outside the projects, because it is often top secret, like in that case, because we were doing subcontracting for the Department of Defense. So working with military people, there were military researchers in the lab. So it was a very interesting experience. But after that, academia seemed like also like a walk in the park in a way, because there were not really that high standards of performance, academic performance. There was a different kind of expectation, which I had to learn, of course, because I was not trained for this kind of work, but I picked up fairly quickly. And throughout my career, I did all kinds of stuff, from SEO management work to data science work, data analytics work at one point as a freelancer, and then program manager in Microsoft. And afterwards, I went into startups and C-level kind of work in data.
And so then when you did your research position, was that within kind of AI and data analytics at that time? The research that you were doing?
Can you repeat? I didn't understand exactly.
Oh, sorry. Yes, when you were in Georgia for the research fellowship, was your work at that time revolving around data analytics and early AI?
Yes. It was all about applied AI in
Right.
machine learning specifically. Although we did use other machine learning models, not just AI-based ones. And we did a lot of data engineering work as well. In the classical sense of data engineering, we didn't do much ETL work, but we did have to develop our own features, for example, make our own models, like high-level models, and then get the data from sensors directly and develop features based on the data and try to understand what's happening there. It wasn't just, here is the data, plug it in a random forest and see what happens. No, we had to do like a lot of work before we could apply a predictive analytics model, which was very interesting because, well, it was real data science work, not to undermine what data scientists do today, of course, because they have their own challenges. But it wasn't as easy as academic work so far had made it look like. So at the university, I didn't have to do any of that stuff when I was doing my PhD. But at the postgrad fellowship, it was a different story, because you are there as a researcher, you have to come up with solutions no matter what. You can't really afford to say, okay, the data is not clean, it's not my job to do it. No.
Get it clean.
Yeah. I mean, there were people who were doing cleaning in the university, but they were cleaning the corridors and stuff, not our data.
Exactly. And so then those early years, did you always have an interest in data and pattern and and things like that right from your engineering days?
I would say yes, because my first thesis, which was part of the whole program of the university, like you can't graduate there unless you do a thesis, which takes about 1 semester to do. So that was very data heavy. So I remember with my supervisor there, who was the assistant professor of the main supervisor. So the main supervisor, because he was very busy with publications and conferences and teaching, he didn't have much time for his students, but he had a very, very good assistant professor who was teaching, helping him, and also mentoring all the students who were doing thesis with him. So that guy was really good, and he was very keen on research. So all the stuff that I learned about predictive models and clustering and all that stuff that people learn in a bootcamp normally nowadays, I learned from him, and also from the literature that he would expose me to. So it was a lot of hands-on work and a lot of modeling work, like this stuff that are bread and butter for data scientists today. Back then they were not so easily accessible, so you had to really research them on your own, read other people's papers, what they have done, read the books, and figure them out yourself. And if you could program a bit, try to implement them. Now, I wasn't that good at programming back then, so I did most of my work in Excel, but still it was pretty heavy work, heavy data work.
Yeah. Right. So then after your research fellowship, I see that you went into technical writing a little bit. How was that back then? Because obviously now you could just kind of like go on Amazon and, write your own book, throw it in, that's fine. But like, how did you find it back in 2011?
Well, I was already involved in different communities in Atlanta with writers, not technical writers specifically, but since I knew technology enough to write about it, I figured might as well do some technical writing, write some blog articles, maybe get some money from there. And I did that for a bit, but it wasn't really something sustainable. And also it wasn't really something that fulfilling, because when you write so that you can earn money, you don't get to pick the topics that you'll enjoy. So around that time, I also did some technical writing for myself to get some ebooks to see if I can actually do some long project and carry it out and see how I can actually do more than just text. So at that time, I started experimenting with image processing and stuff like that, learned how to develop graphics, understand the whole licensing situation and how to avoid getting sued and all that stuff. So I did publish 3 ebooks back then, and all of them, I had them copywritten as well. Now, none of them really brought me any real cash, but they were a really good experience. So afterwards, when I was approached by a publisher during my first data science position, which was in a wonderful company called Elavon, which is now part of US Bank. During that time, when the publisher approached me, I didn't have any doubts I could do the job, because he said, okay, does anybody want to do a book on data science and how to become a data scientist? I said, yeah, why not? Let's try it out. And he was kind enough to mentor me through the whole process and say, okay, well, this chapter is good, but it's a bit thin. Enlarge it a bit. Address these points, or look at this from a reader's perspective. Like, it's not very clear what you're saying here. So stuff like that, because anybody can put some sentences together and form a paragraph, and some paragraphs together to form some kind of chapter, and some chapters together to form a book. Anybody can do that. And nowadays, even AI can do that. Yeah. But to do something that people would actually benefit from and would care to read in its entirety, that's a different story.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you're publishing then, kind of authoring books. Was that something that you had intentionally moved into, or did you kind of fall into it and then caught the bug to write more?
It was a bit of a combination of both, because once you get the satisfaction of having completed a project like this, you know that the next one is going to be a bit easier, and the one after that even easier than that, because you understand better what it takes. It's just like doing a PhD, and I'm not going to say it's easy to do a second PhD. That's why I haven't done it. But I have heard of people who have done 3 or 4, perhaps even more PhD programs, not because they had nothing else to do, but because for them it was fairly easy, and they really enjoyed the research. So it is possible to do multiple PhDs. So if you can do that, then you can also do multiple books. Because if you think about it, the book is like, if you do it properly, a technical book is like writing a PhD thesis, minus the overhead of the research that you have to do prior to being able to do a thesis. So if you can do a PhD thesis, you can write a book. And if you can do one book and do it well, it's not too difficult to do another one. There is this famous book called From Zero to One that is often recommended to entrepreneurs. And the author there, whose name I don't remember at this moment, makes the argument that it's very easy to go from 1 to 2 and to 2 to 3, but going from 0 to 1, that's the big challenge. But once you have done this, it's not difficult to scale up and say, I'll do one more. I'll do one more after that. Just like at the university, when you have finished one course, you have passed it. Okay, it's not that difficult to do another course. And then you gain confidence and momentum. And, before you know it, you're graduating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a kind of something which transcends academics. It seems to be in finance and business and athletics and everything. Once you've got like the ball rolling a little bit, you're like, it wasn't that hard. Even if it was really difficult, you look back with this kind of like fondness of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Plus, if you have things to write about, why not write another book about it? You can't cram everything in one book. Otherwise, you will end up spending over a decade on it, like Stephen Wolfram did for his famous book, which I think made history in technical publishing. But I don't think many people have the luxury of time to do that, and no. I don't think it's very practical to write a very big book, because how many people have the time to read a book that is 1,000 pages long? Most books are 150 to 250 pages usually.
Yeah, no, definitely. Right, so redirecting back onto the career path, when you had moved out of research into your first role, were you eager to get out of kind of research? Were you ready to get into industry?
I believe so, yes, because I had also some time to think, which is really something people forget, that if you take some time off and not work somewhere full time, and you just explore your options, then you get a better understanding of what you really need and what you want, and try to pursue something along those lines. So after my contract at the university finished and I was no longer a postdoc, I had time to think, and I wasn't that eager to go back to work because my expenses were minimal, and I wasn't really that big on just getting anything just because I have to. Plus, I didn't even know what I needed to do, and going back to another postdoc was not really that appealing, especially since most universities were not going to be better than Georgia Tech for sure. Georgia Tech is actually one of the top 5 technical universities in the country, and among the best ones in the world. So my options were very limited. If I wanted to do something along those lines, I had to go into to the same university or something better, like MIT, for example, which I didn't know if I was qualified to do. So I explored different things, and I was excited to get things done, not so much researching things, because you can always do research later. This is something that doesn't ever go away.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, so I think a good point as well is for people, is that advice you would give to anyone who's finishing a PhD or even just finishing university who doesn't know what to do, that to try and take time to consider it and not just jump on the first thing and kind of fall in that trap. Yeah. So then moving on from your SEO positions, is there any kind of notable that you recall decision-making points around through from SEO into data science in the early stages of your career?
Well, I have to say that it's not a normal path. Like if you want to go into data analytics, you don't have to go through SEO or anything that has the word analytics in it. I didn't go to SEO because I liked SEO specifically, but because I really like web technologies, and I still enjoy them. I think there is something magical about developing a website, especially one that has code behind it, and also understanding how the users interact with it. So this was a passion of mine, which I picked up during that period where I was not really employed full time, and I was happy to try also exploring the industry from a company that was smaller, not too big. Of course, it didn't really meet my expectations in any way, although I did gain valuable experience. I got to know some very interesting professionals there, and I got to understand really what it means to be working in a company. But analytics was something I started doing there on my own, not because there was no need for analytics in the company, but because people didn't have the data understanding to see that analytics can actually add value to their company. And it's really hard to point any fingers to anyone about this matter, because I think it's a systemic problem. Many people in the industry, even back then, didn't really understand how important data can be, and analytics on top of that, because data by itself doesn't have an inherent value. But when you do something with it, like develop a predictive model or mine the data for insights, then there is value coming out. So because I was very interested in analyzing data, and I thought that I could do that even on my own, I pursued that. And before long, I thought, okay, well, maybe that's the path for me, because it combined what I enjoyed doing during my PhD and the postdoc with the real world. Because when you do research work, you're limited by the research avenue. So when you do research, you do it for one purpose only, to publish papers and to come up with insights that may benefit the project that you're in, the research project, which are noble pursuits, but they don't really often pay the bills. And if you really want to make a career out of that, the only way to do that is through a tenure at the university.
Yeah.
And that was not in the cards for me for various reasons. So I figured, okay, a career in analytics and what came to be data science seemed to be the right path for me, and I never looked back since then.
Yeah. No, you definitely did not. So how did you find then that transition? If data science was so fulfilling for you, how did you find the transition from that into managing teams of data scientists? Was that just as fulfilling, or was this a whole new set of challenges?
It wasn't as fulfilling, for sure, because hands-on work is the best kind of work you can do if you're a hands-on person. At the same time, it had its own set of lessons. So even though it wasn't as fulfilling, it was very interesting in its own way. Of course, doing middle management kind of work in a big tech company has its own set of challenges. And for some people, maybe it's the best thing ever. But for me, it didn't seem to be like that, because as a program manager, you don't always do interesting projects. And you may do programming if you want to, nobody's going to stop you, but the chances of doing anything meaningful with programming are very few, unless you really want to work overtime and make something happen so you can advance your career. And that's something that some people do, but the problem is that if you do all that stuff in a big company, plus the workload you normally have, you burn out. That's why most people don't stay more than 2 years in a company like that.
Yeah.
I stayed almost 2 years, and then I said, okay, that's enough for me. And I still value the experience there. I think it was one of the best places I have worked, because it wasn't just doing data work, but also seeing the data and understanding the users behind the data to some extent. So it's much different than just crunching numbers because you found them in a database somewhere. These were numbers and text that came from users, and these were people I could relate to as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so at that time, with I assume we're both referring to Microsoft, the time at Microsoft, yeah. With being such a big company, like a big corporate company, but also being a tech company, did you find it was ahead of the curve, or did you find that it fell into that corporate way of working of like loads of layers and it's hard to get anything done?
Well, there was definitely some red tape, like in every big organization.
Yeah.
So I can't hold that against Microsoft. I think all things considering, it was very efficient, because they would really come up with some new feature, and then we implement it very quickly. So there was this startup mentality there, even, believe it or not, at least in the department where I was, because things differ a lot from team to team. Not just in Amazon, in Microsoft, but also in Amazon and other big companies. Because I had also friends from Amazon, for example, so I knew what was happening elsewhere. So I had no illusions as to how things were in general. I thought people may get in a bubble, trapped in a bubble, but this doesn't happen so much if you are in a tech hub like Seattle. So it was a very interesting experience, and I have to say that I cannot really answer this question in depth without spilling the beans on the project.
No. Not to worry. I think no, you said it right. The real question, I suppose, was just like, how did you find that culture change from startup to kind of enterprise? But I think you answered it well with saying that it is, standard kind of corporate red tape, but it is efficient and did have a startup mentality.
Yeah, plus Microsoft is also well known for doing its own thing always, which I think is admirable. People try to be critical about it. They're saying, Microsoft has its own version for pretty much everything. It doesn't use third-party software anywhere. But you know what? This brings about more reliability in the software, because you don't depend on someone else maintaining some package that may or may not exist in the years to come, or some other company which may one day close down. So by being more self-sufficient, it actually has more reliable software. I'm not saying that the best software out there is the one developed by Microsoft, but I think the reliability aspect is a very important thing to consider. And I actually find that applicable in smaller projects as well, in smaller companies too. Like if you own your code base, if you own your code 100%, and you don't rely on someone else's code, which is often closed source, then you tend to have full control over your product. And I was talking to the CEO of a company recently, and he actually advocated the same thing without me prompting him to do so. That he came up on his own and said that. And that was very insightful, because people forget that, if you don't own the means to your product may fail at any moment, and there is nothing you can do about it.
Yep. No, absolutely. Yeah. But I think, it's good. One gives that responsibility and ownership within the company, so that you don't have to rely on other people. But it also, as a byproduct, grows your company as well at the same time, because you offer these services. So then, after Microsoft, you started moving into C-level positions. How did you find that transition?
That was a bit more challenging in some ways, because there was no one really to guide me in what I had to do, and I had to take lots of initiatives, and I wasn't really sure if those initiatives would pan out. So I had to learn to live with uncertainty, take more risks, calculated risks, of course, but still, it wasn't easy, because in the startup world, you can be a C-level executive and you can do lots of different things, but you also have more responsibility. And if one of those things fails, it may bring down the whole project. So it's not in a very easy position to sit. It's like the Damoclean sword kind of metaphor. I think that's applicable here. Because
what's that metaphor? Sorry.
It's from Greek mythology. Like I think Damocles was invited to this lavish dinner somewhere, and he tried to enjoy the whole evening there in the company of the king that invited him and all that. But at the end of the evening, they showed him that there was a sword hanging over him, that at any moment it could fall on him and kill him instantly. And that was the famous Damoclean sword. Like it's a kind of lesson that things can change very rapidly at any moment, and you have to be prepared for that. And you see that very often in strategy games like chess, but in the real world too.
Yeah, especially at those high levels where you're dealing with making the decisions.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's part of the whole experience. I think that's one of the biggest lessons you can learn from the startup world, is that nothing can be taken for granted, nothing at all. Like even if you do everything right, maybe the market is not ready for what you have to offer, or maybe there's a competitor out of nowhere who destroys your company because they can do it better or faster or cheaper or whatever. So you have to learn to live with this uncertainty. There's no way around it.
Yeah. And how do you deal with that? Like if something, that type of situation where if a competitor just comes out and then suddenly that's it, do you just kind of brush yourself off and move on to the next?
I think that's the only thing you can do, really.
Yeah.
Try to learn from the experience, gather lessons, and try not to burn any bridges.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's really difficult after a failed project to just live with grace, but it is doable. And I have seen people do it. And one of the startups I was involved in didn't go very far because it didn't get any funding anywhere. And to be honest, without any clear plan on how to get the funding, it was unlikely it would ever get any funding, although the idea was really very solid. And I'm not going to say which company out there picked up on it, but I do know that they had approached the CEO of that company, who is also very big in the limelight these days. And they told him that, want to work with us, we have this amazing product which you can help sponsor, and maybe this can be a startup you can buy in the future. And I don't think he responded positively. I don't think he responded at all.
No.
But I do know that one of his companies is actually doing the same thing. So there are things like that may happen. And when I left the project, it wasn't because I didn't believe in it anymore, but because I had to relocate. Seattle was getting too expensive for me. And also, I didn't want to stay in that part of the world forever unless I had something more stable. So we ended up in good terms with everyone there. And I still keep in touch with the CEO of that startup, who is now involved in some other projects. So, it is possible to live and not burn bridges. At the same time, it's not always something that you enjoy doing, because when you are committing yourself to a project, you want to see it to fruition, or at least stay until there is an exit strategy into coming into play.
Yeah. And so how many years then have you been within the kind of startup space? Is that your main area of focus as well?
Sort of, yeah. Between that and freelancing, that's what I've been doing the past few years. Although lately I have been doing it a bit more focused, because it's one thing doing a startup without knowing what you're doing and just trying to educate yourself through articles and videos you see. But it's a different thing when you take part in an accelerator program. And recently I had the privilege to be part of the Antler program. And I think I learned more things there than I have learned in the master's course, for example, about the business world, at least.
And do you think that type of knowledge, business knowledge, is what would make a successful C-level? So like you could be a brilliant data scientist, you could even be a good mid-level manager, but to really pull it off in the C-level is to have that business acumen.
I believe so, yes, to a large extent, because what distinguishes the C-level executive from someone who is just a team leader or a program manager or something is that that person knows how to interpret the business needs into something else, or at least attempt to bridge the gap between the two, because it's not easy, and sometimes it's not even feasible given the data available, but at least you try. While a program manager may say, okay, well, this is what we need to do, and if it's too much, they have to escalate it to the step manager sometimes, not just the direct manager, but to the step manager to get something going. And that's how things progress, in my experience, in a big corporation. While in a small company, things are much more swift and much more open-ended, and more free in a way.
Yeah. And do you like that free culture then? Is that what attracts you to the startup space?
There is definitely an appeal there. And also the fact that you have to wear lots of different hats and do lots of different things and liaise with many different people. Well, as a program manager somewhere, or a team leader in general, you may liaise with a lot of interesting people, but usually it is either your own team or people who are on the same level as you, like with other program managers who are also part of the same PM team. So you don't get to meet, for example, the designers of the product, or you don't get to see the UX people, or you don't get to see anything else other than your department, basically. And that's more part of your department, really, not the whole department. You may actually see some other people in a social event, but how much do you get to know them there? While in the startup, you get to see those other people every day, and you get to understand the bigger picture much better and much deeper.
Yeah. No, it does sound appealing, especially if you like to build and develop things, and you also want to kind of move up the ranks, as it were. That within the startup space, you still get that exposure to everything, as you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And I think that it's not a one-way street. Of course, you can always go back to the corporate world if you choose to, and then I think you will be a much better person to have as an asset, not just as an employee, but an asset in the company, because you can do so much more than just what your job description says.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, a couple of questions through that is, how have you seen the change in data science through the years? Like, what kind of stands out to you? Even misconceptions, things like that.
Well, the evolution of data science for me is twofold. First of all, the material has become much more accessible. So if somebody wants to educate themselves, they can do so much more easily. They don't have to go to university. They don't have to do a master's course even, or even a boot camp. I think sometimes it's unnecessary, to be honest, although it can be useful for some people. Like if you're used to this kind of incremental learning and having an instructor, this can be a valuable resource. But nowadays, if you are in a place where there are no boot camps, or you can't afford to go to a boot camp, or you just don't have the time for a boot camp because you're working full-time somewhere, you can still learn data science on your own, especially if you want to get a mentor, because mentorship, I think, has boomed over the past few years. There's so many mentoring companies out there. I don't know how they make a living, to be honest. But there is also new ones coming out. Like I met one of the founders of a mentoring company in Antler, this cohort, and he was from a previous cohort. But it shows that, even recently they have sponsored or invested rather in a mentoring company out there. So it's really amazing. There is always demand for mentors, and I think this is a relationship that is here to stay. It's not new, and it is not going to go away anytime soon. And I think more and more people realize that. So that's why there's this demand for mentors and platforms facilitating all that. Now, the other aspect of data science evolution, I think, has to do with the shallowness of it, because now more and more people get in the field and they don't always have the depth of knowledge or understanding of data and data work. And not just data, but because many people can understand data. Okay, I will have different variables, and these are the different ways to treat them. Okay, you can read that in a textbook, really, and learn data. And you can talk to a mentor, and they can clarify this for you even more. But how do you work the data to meet the business needs? I mean, many people, I think, are still a bit oblivious to that. Not everybody, because I think there are many good data scientists today who just managed to make it despite this very strange environment that is the data science world today, with many books coming out that don't have anything useful to offer, many courses out there that are just a waste of time, and many people who present themselves as leaders and whatever, and they don't really understand data themselves. Nevertheless, there are people out there who learn data science because either they do data science projects on their own, and they have a good mentor, and they learn the stuff on their own, and they get the right resources, and they feel the needs that are there. They're not just doing data work just for the fun of it, which is a good incentive to start, but it's not enough to sustain it, because at one point you have to realize that we don't do the data work because we enjoy it, or because it's fun, or because it's interesting and there's a mental challenge aspect to it. Yes, these are great things, but at the end of the day, it's really the value that you offer through this data work, the insights, how applicable they are, the data strategy that is overarching this whole project and many other projects, perhaps. So it's not really an isolated tactic that people do just to get some quick and dirty insights out there. That can be the case in some places, but is not something that has much of a future in my view. So this is how data science is nowadays, fortunately or unfortunately, because there's definitely lots of opportunities there, but at the same time there's lots of pitfalls that if you're not careful you can easily fall in there and you don't even know that you're in that pitfall.
Yeah. And do you think the public perception of it on both sides, as one side being that a data scientist is a kind of quote unquote cool thing to get into, and then the other side is the public privacy of data and things like that. How do you think that's changed since you started out in data?
People are much more aware of privacy matters, and there are
Mm-hmm.
more regulations in place, at least in Europe, with GDPR being in vogue, and probably it's here to stay. And there are other regulations that around the globe about protecting private data, and people are becoming more aware of that. So that has changed, and that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
Because in the past, people didn't really realize that the people behind that data may not want to have their identities exposed.
Yeah.
And people don't really tend to empathize so much with the users of the
Mm-hmm.
platforms who they're involved in, and they say, okay, well, I just want to do my work and that's it. But no, your work impacts other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And people are now becoming more aware of that because there have been enough data breaches, even in big companies, and enough lawsuits. So people are much more sensitive on these matters. Now, on other things, the public perception, I think, has shifted as well. Like data scientist is still considered a good position to have, but it may not be the sexiest job of the 21st century for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps if the trend continues, maybe the AI expert is the sexiest job. I don't know. That's still something to discover, and that's what's fascinating about everything data related, is that things evolve so rapidly, and that you may not like so much a specific approach to analytics, which is commonplace up until now, but there are new techniques coming out with AI and stuff like that. So if you don't like the conventional approaches to analytics, you can delve into the more modern ones, which may seem like they're related to the old ones, but they're not so much. There's a different school of thought altogether. And if you really dig into the literature to see how the first AI systems were, they had nothing to do with what people think. Like there were different kinds of AI systems, and the whole paradigm that encompasses AI, at least in the good old-fashioned AI, as some people call it, is more possibilistic than probabilistic. Now, of course, there is probability theory applied everywhere nowadays, so there is probability-based systems in AI as well. Although you don't really need to be a stat expert to do AI nowadays.
Yeah, it's like a lower barrier to entry now. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to kind of openly discuss? Because I'll look back at that quote. As you said, healthy skepticism and some creative optimism. Is there anything surrounding data analytics and AI which you would like to discuss, even like as a kind of preamble before we talk about the book?
There are so many things I'd like to discuss, but I don't want to make this too long an episode and go into tangents here and there. So unless you have any other questions, you can just wrap it up. It's fine.
Yeah, no, that's all the questions from me now. Hopefully we could do another episode in the future then if you have some things you'd like to talk about. I'd be interested to hear, now that we kind of have a background of
Sure. I would love to talk more about data matters with you, and maybe in the future I will be more equipped to talk about something that I've been researching recently, namely data literacy, because it's not a new topic by any means. There are actually many LinkedIn groups even on data literacy. There's a book that I have come across on data literacy, and probably other books as well. And Bernard Marr talks a lot about it in his course about data strategy and his book on data strategy. So it's not a new thing by any means. It's just something I have started delving into more because I find it very relevant to the world of data and business today.
Is data literacy meaning how people perceive and read like data and data analysis?
That's part of it, but it's also understanding the potential of data, understanding the different roles, what they do, and different kinds of data, what they can offer, different methods. Basically understanding what data scientists and data analysts do,
Yeah.
but also the business aspects of all of this, because I don't think a business person really cares so much about understanding how clustering works, but they do understand that, using clustering to group the different customers or clients into groups that make sense and use that information to target them more efficiently and make a better user experience for them. That actually is something they will understand.
Yeah.
And that's something that requires understanding a bit of clustering without getting to the algorithmic level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because and that's it. As you notice that within companies, you have to bridge that space between the techies doing stuff and the business doing stuff. You have to create that business bridge of the need for it. And yeah, data is that unknown minefield of like it's just loads of data and stuff, and they don't really know what's going on. So yeah, data literacy is definitely something that's I think necessary within the business world.
Mm-hmm.
Bit of
Definitely.
accessibility, for sure. Well, I appreciate having you on, Zach. Thanks for your time. So tell us about your new book before we go.
Sure. It's called The Data Path Less Traveled, and it came out this spring, summer, around that time. I've been working on it for about half a year or so, 9 months, including the edits. And I published it with the publisher I worked with for the past few years, Techniques Publications. And unlike other books on data topics, this one aims to look into a different subtopic that not many people talk about, but it's very interesting in and of itself because it has a lot of applicability in the business world as well. It's not just a data topic that is cool for data professionals, but for anyone, because at the end of the day, when you want to do something with data, you want to start with something simple, something scalable, something that is not very difficult to communicate to other people. And that something is, in my book, the heuristics. So it's all about this kind of simple metrics and algorithms that can add a lot of value very quickly without having to hire some specialist who just came out of this amazing university or from some big consulting firm. I imagine most data scientists are familiar with the term, so I don't need to say too much about it, but it is something that is like a deep rabbit hole where you may see that it's there, you may think that you know it because you have seen the outer parts of it where there's still light, but if you go deep into it, you see that there's so much more to it, and that the deeper you go, the more you understand data and the more you understand the value that data can bring. So that's something I have explored a lot during my PhD because it was heavy on heuristics, and something I have been doing since then. So it's not something that you leave behind because it's of academic interest. It's actually more relevant today, in my view, than it was back then, because now there are many more heuristic metrics and algorithms out there, and there are many more to be made. So there is a lot of potential for creativity with heuristics. And some people may say, okay, well, why do we need all this stuff? We have AI systems. But you know what? Many AI systems use heuristics under the hood. So it's not something that is either or. You can have the modern systems with these niche algorithms and metrics that are heuristics. So the book is all about that. And it is it's not just theory, but also it has, I think, 5 different code notebooks in the Julia language.
Oh, brilliant. And just for anyone who's unaware, would you be able to describe heuristics? So if someone was a business person watching this, thinking they wanted to get more into data science without writing a big check to someone straight out of uni, what's heuristics to them?
It can be lots of different things. Some people would say that even a KPI is a kind of heuristic. And they understand KPIs for sure. Also things like attrition rate. Is there any theory behind this metric? I have worked in attrition projects, and I didn't see any theory behind this particular metric. So it is, by the definition of heuristics, a heuristic of sorts. So all these things that have a meaning because they solve a real world problem often, are kinds of heuristics. But they don't have to be something so simple as that. They can also be more sophisticated. So you can build programs that use heuristics under the hood, and this can help you, for example, find an optimal route from A to B. And there are many algorithms that do that, actually, and these are heuristic algorithms, or meta heuristics as they're often called. So all that stuff that is often used, and we don't even pay much thought to that, there are based on heuristics, or there are heuristics themselves.
We'll get Zach's new book. Link will be in the description for anyone watching. But yeah, appreciate you having you on. Appreciate the time. And take care. And have a Merry Christmas and Good New Year.
Thank you very much, and same to you.